Well, welcome back to the Future Sox podcast. My name is Elijah Evans, joined by my co host Dylan Barnas, and we are T minus 3 days until actual White Sox baseball games will be played. Spring training kicking off here this Friday as we record on Tuesday the 17th. Super excited to get things going. We're 3 days away from spring training. We're 2 weeks and change away from the World Baseball Classic, and we're ready to get going. It's time to watch some real baseball. College baseball kicked off, plenty of very normal White Sox conversations across the social media world about the college baseball world, particularly two prospects, right? And we'll see what the rest of that looks like as time gets going here. But we're ready to get rolling. Dylan's got somebody knocking on his door, but it's all good because we're here. The season's getting going, so we'll get it going. Today, we're going to talk mostly a variety of just positional battles. I can't stop myself from chuckling a little here, given the context. But we're going to talk positional battles. We're going to get into kind of just where the White Sox still need to figure out for the roster, what the 26-man roster is going to look like come opening day. We have, I think it's pretty safe to say there's somewhere in the 20 to 22 roster spots that are all but locked up at this point. Aside from that, we're going to get a number of battles in camp to see who can crack the roster. So we're going to go through today, kind of talk through the offense and the defense, both sides of the ball, where there are still battles that are going to be happening entering camp, and who could potentially be the candidates to emerge from each of those battles. So we'll see how all that plays out. I'll wait for my co-host here, just entertain us as we get going here at the top of the show. Like, how's everybody doing? Chat, what's going on? We got options. One of the big takeaways today, I don't know who follows the baseball world and just the MLB news, but the Players Association director stepped down this morning. If you haven't looked at that story, it's something for sure. I don't think it's the best of look for the PA head to be stepping down ahead of some very complicated CBA negotiations that are going to get going here in the coming months. So that's going to be a fascinating storyline to follow. I mean, the chat says it all. I don't need to say it. I don't need to put that out there into the air. It's a really weird situation. It's pretty messed up, I would say. That's a rough one for Tony Clark for sure. I think that is just a bad look across the board. So we'll see what happens. But it is interesting. I know everybody's starting to talk about the potential incoming lockout and just what that could look like and the CBA and everything. I err on the side of caution in this regard. Like, I really don't think we're gonna lose an entire season of baseball. I'm not the type of person who sees it that way. I think from people in the industry that I've talked to about it and just gotten to gauge, like, yeah, it's gonna be messy. It's gonna get complicated. There's gonna be a lot to consider here, off the top of what may happen or may not happen in terms of just getting us going and getting a season in place for 2027. But I also think that there's some room to make things happen and not have it be potentially as ugly as some people may think it's going to get. I think realistically, we enter the offseason with a messy, complicated couple months, and then we get things going by May of 2027 in the worst case. I really don't think we're going to miss that much time. Dylan, welcome back, man. What's going on?
Yeah, that was super weird. I've never had that happen before, where somebody comes up and knocks on my window as I'm sitting right in front of it. But I assume that we're talking
Welcome to
about
college,
Players
man. Welcome to
Association
college,
stuff.
dude. It's about time, man. You've been in college for 2 years, 3 years, and you haven't had that happen yet.
Yeah.
Like, get used to it,
Well,
bro.
no, not like when I'm recording a podcast. I had to tell, like, hey, I'm doing something real quick. Yeah. But anyways, but yeah, that Players Association was it's really crazy because, like, I know that, like, Tony Clark wasn't the most, I want to say, like, well liked MLB Players Association, like, figurehead, but it seems like, if I'm forgetting the names off the top of my head, the guys who would replace him, it seems like they're more so of the, like, old school. They're gonna duke it out, whereas Tony Clark would sort of just, like, fold to whatever the owners would want. But I'm not sure. I really have no idea about how all of this works out, but I think that, like, it's a pretty big thing to just change, especially given the impending lockout that's going to happen. You hope that you don't lose games in 2027, but if that does happen, you have to wonder how much this change affected it, because I'm sure that Tony Clark had a good relationship, or at least a better relationship, with the MLB owners than whoever is going to replace him. But again, it's just a super weird scenario that I don't think has ever really happened before.
Yeah, it's funky for sure. I mean, we're already in a situation that's going to be complicated in terms of like what we're ahead of us in terms of the negotiations, what the contract may look like. I know I hit on it when you were on your little hiatus there to answer the
Yeah.
window. But my big thing is like I don't think we're missing the whole season. I really am not in the camp of people that believe that. But I do
Yeah.
think it's going to get really complicated, and you're going to need some people leading the charge on the Players Association side to make things happen. So it's going to be an interesting one, and we'll see what happens. Either way, that situation itself is pretty awful, and hopefully there's some people that are ready to step up and lead the Players Association to get what they need to get in this coming year. So we'll see what happens in that regard. Spring training stuff. It's exciting, man. We're seeing a lot of film.
Yeah.
We're seeing a lot of juice coming out. We saw Luis Angel Acuna, a right-handed batter, if you were wondering, went way deep
Not a
today,
lefty.
and went way deep today from the right side of the plate. He crushed the Schomburg fastball, and that was smoked. That's been cool to see. I've heard about a lot of bullpens. Obviously, everybody's out there throwing. We've got, in terms of big league camp, right? You've got guys like Noah Schultz and Hagen Smith and plenty of other names who are out there throwing already. Some encouraging things we've heard in terms of just like how guys are looking. Obviously, going through their progressions, kind of just starting to build up at this point, not into their full routines yet. Really just getting in the groove. But then, we'll see this weekend. We're going to get some appearances from some high end prospects. In terms of in game stuff. I think that the early games this season, we're going to see some of the Big Ten prospects right out of the gate actually this weekend. So I'm pumped. I got a bar mitzvah to go to this weekend, so I'm probably going to miss the Saturday game, which I know we're going to get a couple fun pitchers in that game. But I'll be locked in on the Friday and Sunday games, that's for sure.
Yeah, no, it seems like a lot of the younger guys, they're sort of getting their like big league camp experience out of the way first, so
Yeah.
that they can get reassigned to minor league camp and just go throw on backfields whenever, just no pressure, no nothing, just work on one thing. But the thing that I'm most looking forward to is publicly available Statcast data for every single game, and like
True.
spring training is the time where pitchers tinker and add pitches and just try out new grips and see what works. And last year we saw the debut of Noah Schultz's cutter, and it didn't, it had like a weird effect on his sinker and his changeup. But if he can reintroduce that pitch and just have everything click together, I think Noah Schultz is in for a very big spring, and I think that he's a name that I'm for sure going to be looking out for in the coming weeks, because I think he's going to be one of those names that gets, I don't want to say reassigned quickly, but like he probably won't break camp with the team unless he just goes ballistic and there's injuries in the pitching staff, which after last season, I'm not ruling that out. You hope that everybody can stay healthy, but with the amount of pitcher injuries that the White Sox had last spring training, it would not shock me at all if Noah Schultz just dominates his way up, and some pitchers aren't feeling top shelf, and he just is the best pitcher in the White Sox rotation that could even get the five spot.
I mean, the stuff is there. We know this stuff is there for
Yeah.
Noah Schultz. It's really just a matter of health, and if he can stay on the field consistently and put in these at bats and in a positive manner, I think I'm encouraged to hear that he looks good. Don't get me wrong, but I think that for Schultz, like putting together 2 consecutive months of healthy quality outings is
Yep.
probably the more important aspect. I think that's really what it's going to come down to. A handful of other things. I think there's definitely some noteworthy videos and films out there that people can go check out. I'm sure we're going to be pumping it a lot on Future Sox for sure. So yeah, keep up to date. Spring training stuff is cool. I mean, it's interesting. We're definitely going to have. I'm still trying to get out there. I don't know if I'm going to get out there. I'm hoping to for a couple days here at the end of the month. But other than that, I think that there's we're gonna have Jeff out there for a bit. We're gonna have James out there for a bit, I think. So we're gonna have coverage. Spring training is fun, and it's just gonna be cool to see kind of how everything gets going. And then before you know it, we're not that far away from actual games. That'll be super exciting to watch. So yeah, let's get into some positional battles, man. I know the guys James and Ian talked about some stuff along those lines this past week, but I think yeah, we can get into kind of just where the roster spots that are up for grabs still compared to the ones that are kind of locked down already, and then the ones that we know are locked in place, right? Who could be competing for those final spots? Who are the favorites for it, and ultimately who we think will claim those remaining roster spots? You want to start on the offensive side, pitching side? What are you feeling?
I feel like the more interesting side of things is the offensive side, just given the fact that there's a center. I don't even know if a center field like spot is open. The starting versus bench center fielder could be up between Luis Angel Acuna, Brooks Baldwin, whoever they want to slide in there. But the bench is actually the more intriguing part, because there's some names that they gave up a decent bid for. You guys like Curtis Mead, you traded Adrian Hauser for last deadline. Guys like Everson Pereira, you traded for him before the Rule 5 deadline, and he's still on your 40-man roster right now. And it seems, I mean, I know I on the Just Baseball show, Jack McMullen picked him as one of his breakouts for
That
2026.
was
I don't know.
that
I don't
was
know
a
if that.
hilarious segment. Jack was super in on him on Pereira as a prospect like years
Yeah,
ago. I remember him
yeah.
being a Pereira guy when he was coming up through the ranks, and I think it was a little bit of a joke, but I also think he did believe in that profile a couple years
It
back and
it could
still thinks it
work.
could click.
It
So
could
yeah,
work.
we'll start on the offensive side, man. I mean, 13 roster spots, generally speaking, right? I know everybody that listens to us is baseball people, and you guys know this, but 13 spots on the offensive side, 13 spots on the pitching side of things. I think, when you look at the roster right now, top down in terms of just where you're at offensively, I'm just going to read through the names here because I really don't think there's more than two, debatably three spots that are still actually, being competed for right now. So just going through the roster positionally, you got Kyle Teal and Edgar Caro locked in. That's two. On the infield side, Munetaka Murakami, Miguel Vargas, Colson Montgomery, Chase Mydroth. That's six so far. I think those are all pretty comfortably locked. I think Andrew Benintendi, Austin Hayes, and Luis Angel Acuna on the outfield side are locked. That's nine at this point. I think that's probably your opening day nine, most likely.
Yep.
Assuming he's not traded, Lenin Sosa is your fifth infielder, right, on this roster. He's going to be a combination of DH, first base, maybe a little second base behind Mydroth, whatever that may be, right? So you're going to have at least 10 spots there, I think, that are pretty much locked up, right? And that's bearing trades. You never know. We could see a spring training trade of Lenin Sosa. That's definitely possible. But that's 10 spots that are pretty much solidified on the offensive side. Three bench spots remaining. You'd think at least two are outfielders, or maybe one is a utility. I think that we think Brooks Baldwin is on the roster. With that said, I wouldn't be absolutely shocked, given Brooks Baldwin has two options, to see him start the year in Charlotte for the sake of roster protection. So I'm not going to include him in the locked category for now. So let's say we're operating with three spots available on the offensive side, and a lot of stuff open. For sure. There's a lot of possibilities with the way you attack this. I think of those three spots, you need at least one, probably two that are outfielders or can at least play outfield, even if you consider Brooks more of a utility than an outfielder. There's still the possibility of Corey Lee because I do think there's a world the White Sox carry three catchers out of the gate if they do plan to have Edgar Caro being a primary DH for this team. So then if you do decide to carry a third catcher in Corey Lee, you're down to only two spots available, both likely being outfielders. You've still got guys like Curtis Mead who are competing for the infield spot, but if Lenin Sosa's on the roster, hard to see that cracking. Where's your just initial head at with starting with those 10? We've got 10 locked aside, three spots remaining, not including either Baldwin or Lee.
I think that, if we're not including Brooks Baldwin or Curtis Mead, I think that Everson Pereira has to be, or I don't want to say has to be, but he would be my pick for just like the next most logical spot. Just given he's on the 40-man right now, he's got a little bit of big league experience. It hasn't been great, but you look at his AAA numbers and he rakes. So I don't think that he has much left to prove in AAA. And you like I said, you traded for him less than, or was it about 3 months ago now, 4 months ago, something like that. And I don't think they're going to just want to cast him to the curb like that. I mean, you gave up
Yeah,
Steven Wilson and Yoenders Gomez, who, yeah, they're probably both bullpen arms, but the White Sox bullpen could use, I don't want to say could use a Steven Wilson or a Yoenders Gomez, but like they could have been used in this current White Sox team. So I think that
sure.
Pereira has a little bit longer of a runway, given the fact that, again, he's a new add to the organization, and he has to stay on the 26-man roster because he doesn't. I believe he's out of options. I could be wrong on that, but I'm fairly confident he's out of options, and that's why the Rays were willing to give him up. But I think the Pereira is probably the pick that I would go with. But then, I could see like an outside chance of, a Jared Kelnick making it on the 26 man, just given the fact that the organization seems to like him. I mean, they did an introductory press conference for a non-roster invite, and I'm not sure really how many other non-roster invites are getting a introductory press conference, but I could see them trying to fix something with him and take a swing on him, and maybe Ryan Fuller can work his magic again. Another one that I could maybe see, I'm not entirely sure is Lamont Wade. He didn't have the great. He hasn't had the greatest. I want to say past 2 seasons, but there was one year where he was in San Francisco, and he got the nickname Late Night Lamont because he was coming through every night in the clutch for the Giants. And yeah, like there's things that need to be fixed with him. There's a reason why he got a minor league deal. But if even just one non-roster invite can click and make the roster, I think that's a successful. You use it as it was intended to do. You gave a guy a shot, and he ended up working out. So I could see either Wade or Kelnick being like one of the non-roster invites that make the team. I'm really not sure about anybody else who could possibly make the team. I mean, guys like Dustin Harris, Drew Baker, and like really that's about it. I mean, all the other non-roster invites are prospects who I really don't think have. I don't want to say a chance at cracking the team on opening day, but like I I would be I would be shocked if like Drew Romo or Oliver Dunn. Like I doubt that either of them make the roster. So I think that if a non-roster invite does make it, it would be either Wade or Kelnick.
Yeah, I kind of would agree with that. I think Kelnick is the way I would lean. I think Wade is not a bad pull there because this was a guy who was a pretty productive big leaguer as recent as 2 years ago, right? Like you mentioned there. So the interesting thing with Curtis Mead is Curtis Mead doesn't have an option.
Yeah.
So that makes it tricky. Where I think you look at a guy like if and then neither does Kelnick, right? But he's a non-roster invite, right? So you don't have to
Mhm.
commit to that, right? So that's the interesting thing. That's where I think Pereira, like you said, kind of does have an edge there because I think just he doesn't have an option. He's on an actual, a contract, right? To answer the question, we got a question in the chat here coming in from Alec too about, if Braden makes the roster. I don't think Braden makes the roster. I don't think there's any chance
Doubt it.
Braden makes the roster, especially because you have other guys in the picture here. Kelnick and Pereira are the two that I keep coming back to because I do think they're going to give both those guys a shot. This is where it gets interesting. If you have 3 spots left and Mead doesn't have an option and Pereira doesn't have an option, does that push Brooks Baldwin off the roster for now? The only thing that's tricky with that is like Brooks Baldwin's probably your platoon center fielder right now. I don't think they're ready to make Luis Angel Acuna your everyday center fielder, and there's really nobody else that plays center field on this roster behind Luis Angel Acuna, right? So if you've got 3 spots left, I kind of lean in the direction of it's Brooks for the versatility aspect, just because with Brooks Baldwin, you get a guy who can play all over. You don't have to worry about having a backup, in a weird way, like the infield solves itself, though. That's what's interesting because the backup shortstop is probably Chase Meidroth, who plays second base. The backup third baseman is probably Colson Montgomery, or if needed, Lenine Sosa, Munetaka Murakami, right? Like you've got options there. So you don't necessarily need a backup at those spots. But if you do want another middle infielder to give either Chase or Colson the day off in the middle of the infield, Brooks Baldwin can be that guy, right? So you do. I think Brooks just gives you a lot of roster flexibility, but him having options and those other guys not having options could make it interesting there, where maybe it's a Curtis Mead over Brooks Baldwin because Mead can back up both third and second, and then you have Mydroth being your backup shortstop inherently behind Colson. So that's where it gets really interesting to me, and that's where I think Brooks Baldwin, as much as I would probably have him on the roster, I don't think he's really a roster lock at this point. And that's why I started with those 10, not including Baldwin, because I do think with the option situation, there's a world that Baldwin gets pushed out and Pereira is your fourth outfielder and he can play some center if needed, or Kelnick. And then you have Mead being the guy who is more of the backup utility infielder instead of Baldwin being the combo of both almost.
I would lean Baldwin, just given the fact that I think that they would want, I want to say 5 outfielders on the roster because Austin Hayes and Andrew Benintendi are older. They're
Right.
going to want to get off their
It's
feet
a good point.
at least one day a week. So I would assume that they want to carry 5 outfielders. And like you said, Brooks Baldwin can fill in basically anywhere on the field outside of catcher. So I would assume that Baldwin makes a team. But then if they want to give a shot to like Curtis Mead, how much runway do you think that he gets before you cut bait? And Brooks Baldwin had a productive second half of the season, so I think that they would want to give Baldwin just a little bit more of just an area to carve out a specific role on the team and not just be this sort of backup AAA or like quad A guy who gets shuttled back and forth due to injury. So I think that I would lean Baldwin, but if Curtis Mead just has a crazy spring and he goes on the Miguel Vargas route where, it was just one simple swing tweak away where, he's pulling balls in the air now. And, now he looks like the top
Right.
100 prospect Curtis Mead that he was in 2024. So I could see either, but I would lean Baldwin just given he can play all over. And, both corner outfield spots are probably going to be guys who are going to need to DH at least once, maybe twice a week.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think Baldwin gives you a lot more flexibility, but it doesn't really. You could go the route of both. Ian just put in the chat. I'm bad with names. I'll admit it myself. Right? Pereira. Okay, we'll go with Pereira. If you give Pereira and Kelnick the opportunity. Maybe that's your fourth and fifth outfielders. And then Mead and Sosa are your infielders. If you don't want a Corey Lee on the roster, maybe it's both those guys. It could be that Brooks gets pushed for both Kelnick and Pereira, and then you go Mead because he doesn't have options left with as that last infielder. I could see a world where the bench is Sosa, Mead, Pereira, and Kelnick.
But at the same time, are we sure that Jared Kelnick is better than Brooks Baldwin?
No,
Like,
not at
no,
all. Not
yeah,
not at
like,
all sure. Does he
yeah,
have more
like,
pedigree though? And do you want to have the
right,
option to keep
yeah.
him? Maybe, but
But
he's on a minor league
again,
deal though, so you can send him to
yeah,
AAA,
yeah,
right?
exactly. So I think that if it comes down to Baldwin or Kelnick, I think that they would go Baldwin just because, again, is it crazy to say Baldwin's had more major league success than Jared Kelnick? Like, I'm not really
I think
sure.
that's a little. I think that's a little crazy. Kelnick's had
Kelnick has
some
been
success. I know
Kelnick
he's
has
been
been
bad, but
really
like
bad.
Kelnick's
Maybe
still
maybe
pumped. I mean, Kelnick still
maybe
had
really bad
had
is
his 23-year-old season before Brooks Baldwin. Brooks Baldwin didn't even debut till he was 24. Jared Kelnick's 23-year-old season, he had a 110 WRC plus and a 1.5 WAR season. I'm not saying that's great by any means, but that's
yeah.
better than Brooks Baldwin has done to this extent, and it's not actually particularly close.
True, but at the same time, like Brooks Baldwin is younger than Jared Kelnick and has options. Like you won't need to like DFA him to be able to
Yeah.
clear him through AAA. So like I don't know. I think that Baldwin just gives you a lot more flexibility with the roster, and I think that that's going to be another theme that we're going to see this year. Is just I don't want to say shuffling guys around, but like I don't think that there's going to be one player that plays 140 games at one specific position outside of like Kyle Teal, Edgar Carroll. They're basically splitting
Yeah.
80 games down the middle at catcher and then Murakami at first. But like outside of that, if you told me that like none of the other seven positions on the field were played more than 120 times by the same guy, it wouldn't shock me at all. Just given I don't think that the White Sox are necessarily there yet where you can say, all right, Colson Montgomery is going to be every day playing 155 games at shortstop when you've got guys like Caleb Bonham and presumably the number one overall pick, whoever that may be, he's probably going to be a shortstop. Like it's tough to say like, all right, we're going to get Colson reps at short, but then he's probably going to be a third baseman in 2027 or 2028. So
Yeah, I still think that he is the primary guy there, though. And if he's
yeah,
not, then I
he
think I
still
think
will be.
Chase Mydroth is also a strong. It proved to be better defensively at short than I think we expected at the onset of last year too. So the tricky wrinkle to this is like we're talking about all these hypotheticals around Baldwin, Pereira, and Kelnick. What if they want Corey Lee on this roster? Because then it gets even trickier, right? If they want Corey Lee on this roster for the sake of having a third catcher, I still think Corey Lee getting traded sometime the next month makes the most sense for everybody. I think that just is the logical thing. But do you want to bet on? He doesn't have any options, so you're basically that's another guy that doesn't have options, right? So if you're not willing to risk Corey Lee leaving for nothing, which I think he would get claimed because everybody needs a backup catcher, man. A lot of
Yep.
teams need a backup catcher, and Corey Lee might not be this guy, but he's not the guy for the White Sox, but he's a decent backup catcher. And I think that plenty of teams would claim him on waivers. So that's where it gets tricky because you're no matter what, you're putting someone through waivers. And I think it probably honestly comes down to who you think is clearing waivers. Doug in the chat says he thinks Mead would clear waivers. I think Mead would have a good shot at clearing waivers. I think there's other guys that would have a good shot at clearing waivers as well. I mean, maybe Pereira clears waivers. I mean, this is a guy who wasn't really wanted elsewhere, right? I don't know who clears waivers, but somebody's going to be going through waivers bearing at least a trade or two because there's a lot of guys that don't have options that are competing for these final bench spots. To sum it up here, right? Like 3 spots between Baldwin, Corey Lee, Everson Pereira, Jared Kelnick. Who am I missing there?
Lamont Wade.
Like Curtis Mead, Lamont Wade, Derek Hill, still a guy that has no options,
Yeah.
and the Sox like him defensively as a defensive replacement. There's probably more even that might be qualified beyond that. I mean, Tanner Murray has options; he'll be optioned. Everybody else is non-roster. Tristan Peters has options; he'll be optioned. Okay, so that's still 6 spots for 3 guys, right? I mean, that's a tricky situation to be in, and it's a good situation, right? It's a good problem to have. I'm glad the White Sox have competing roster spots, but it is 6 guys probably without options that that Brooks Baldwin has an option, right? So that's the one guy that has an option. That's why, as much as I agree with you that I do think Baldwin should make this team, I could see him being pushed out at least for the first month of the season, just because he's the one that has options of those 6 guys I mentioned there.
Adrian basically subbed it up in the chat. I think Curtis Mead is the one that you would miss the least, just given the fact that you've got Miguel Vargas, Colson Montgomery, whoever is going to play third, and then Munetaka Murakami at first. And maybe Curtis Mead can play second. I'm not really sure. I don't even know if he's better than Chase Mydroth or Lenine Sosa, whoever. So I think that Mead would be the one that if you have to choose one, he would be the one that I would pick. But at the same time, I think that the way that I would build my bench, if I'm given 4 spots, I would go Baldwin, Pereira, Everson, the guy from the Rays, Baldwin, Pereira, Corey Lee, and Lenny Sosa. Like I think that that's how I would build it, but I'm not sure.
Yeah. I mean, that's what roster resource has right now. And I think that's probably the same. I mean, again, my ideal outcome is you trade Corey Lee, right? Like, I just think that's
Right?
the guy
Yeah.
who you just don't like. And somebody mentioned this in the chat. That's a great way to, if Corey Lee can play some outfield, if he wants to play some third base, like I know he's a guy that's had versatility in the past. Like maybe that's the way that Corey Lee becomes valuable. I don't love it. I don't, it doesn't make me happy, but like I
Yeah.
could see it being possible for the sake of keeping him on this roster. I, I don't know, man. I think I agree with you generally. I don't like Corey Lee. Like, is not. I don't know, man. It just he doesn't do anything for this team. At the end of the day, like even if the White Sox view, I mean, the indication from the organization seems to me that Edgar Caro is more of a backup than a platoon, which I don't necessarily agree with. But if that's the case, and the organization views Teal as the clear A and Caro as the clear B, you don't need a third catcher. If something absolutely happens to Kyle Teal on a day where Edgar Caro's DHing, you lose your DH spot. It happens. Like I
Yeah.
don't like that's not it's not the worst outcome. And like I don't know. I maybe that's me being a little bit too like naive to that, but like I don't really think that's the best situation to go for. I don't think it's the best use of a roster spot to have Corey Lee, frankly, because I think that Corey Lee would barely play, right? I mean, the ideal situation is that Edgar Caro play every day that Kyle Teal is not catching, it's Edgar Caro catching, right? So yeah, there will be a couple days a week or 1 or 2 days a week where it's Teal catching, Caro DHing. And those days, yeah, like if something happens, you lose your DH. Like, okay, whatever. Like the amount of circumstances where that would actually come into play and matter is so little for a team that's not a playoff team that I'd rather use that bench spot on somebody who's more valuable. So I think for me on the offensive side, I would go Brooks Baldwin, even though I do think there is a chance that we're all surprised and he gets, he ends up getting option because he's the one with options. But I think I would go, we penciled in Lenny Sosa, Brooks Baldwin, Everson Pereira, and then starting the year with Curtis Mead as that last spot because of the options, because you protect the ability to have him on that roster. You have Kelnick in triple, you have Lamont Wade in triple. If Mead struggles a lot early, you send him through waivers. If someone claims him, so be it, and you bring up one of those guys. If he thrives early in a bench role, utility role, cool, that's great. He can be your backup second baseman, your backup third baseman. Aleem Sosa only really plays first in DH then in that situation and just hits when he hits, and you leave it at that.
The only issue I have with like Mead making the roster is I feel like he plays too similar of a role to Lenine Sosa, where it feels like it would kind of just be like using 2 bench spots for the same guy. But like
Better defensively, though. There's a lot more
yes,
defensive
yeah,
value
yeah,
there
correct,
comparatively. So that
right.
gives a little more juice. But yeah, I know what you mean.
But yeah, like it's a corner infield only profile, maybe second base in a pinch, and
Right.
then probably DHing. But then like Lenine Sosa undoubtedly had a better year than Curtis Mead last year, and I
Fair.
just think I think that they would want a third catcher just on the off chance that something happens during a game, and it's like
Yeah.
the second inning,
It's
and
like
Kyle Teal takes a stinger off his hand and can't bend it anymore.
I think there's an earthquake right now. That's crazy.
Oh my god.
Maybe it's just a rain. It's been raining all day in California. This is a weird podcast for us today, guys. It's
Yeah,
been raining
this
all
is
day, and I just
crazy.
like totally felt my chair shake. That was kind of cool. I don't know. I think we're good, but that was kind of crazy. That just caught me off guard, man. You were like talking, and I just started here. I just like felt a little like rumble. Maybe it was either
That's
really loud thunder or it was like a mini earthquake. We get some of those out here, so
that's
huh,
fun.
that was something. All right, well, back to the topic at hand here. I don't disagree with you. I do think Curtis Mead is a little bit redundant on the roster, but where I think it gets interesting is the fact that like for the sake of Miguel Vargas, for the sake of Munetaka Murakami, and even for the sake of Colson Montgomery, I think it gives you a little flexibility where, like, if Colson DHs one day to keep him a little bit more chilled out, right? Mydroth can shift to short. Curtis Mead can play a solid second base, and you're not forced to play Lenine Sosa at second base. If Miguel Vargas, if you want to have Murakami have a day or two to DH in a given week, you can Vargas to first and Mead to third, something like that, right? It gives you a little bit more like movement in the roster. But from an offensive standpoint, I agree. I mean, Curtis Mead hasn't done anything in his 3 partial big league seasons to prove that he deserves a spot in this roster, or to really prove that he would be claimed. But I do think because he's versatile, and there's a chance he gets claimed, but I think they probably could sneak him by waivers. And the interesting thing is, like, we don't know. Like, there could be some of these non-roster guys that just show out in the next month. Like, there's a world where a guy like Tristan Peters, a guy like we said, Kelnick is the one we mentioned already. Like, there's guys that could just show up and rake and make the last spot on this bench. But I do think
Right.
right now, I think we're both in agreement that Baldwin and Pereira are the ideal, fourth and fifth outfielders for this team, and Baldwin essentially being a super utility guy. Then from there, that last spot could go. I mean, it could be a catcher, it could be an infielder, it could be just it could really go a lot of different directions. So I'm curious to see kind of how that plays itself out. But I do think we're both close to agreement, or I think we're both in agreement on Baldwin and Pereira. That last spot is where I guess I lean Mead maybe, but I also think Corey Lee is probably, if Corey Lee doesn't get traded, you can't option Corey Lee. He's going to get claimed.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm with you in that regard. Where like if he's not traded, you're going to take
Right.
Corey Lee because somebody will claim him if you try to option him. So I don't know.
Yeah, that's sort of like my thinking there too. Is like the White Sox claimed Drew Romo in like I want to say December or something like that, and then we all thought that like, oh yeah, it's an indication that Corey Lee is gone or whatever. But then like a month later, they were able to sneak him through waivers. So I'm not really sure. I think that was just sort of like a I don't want to say stroke of luck given like the time, but like if Corey Lee hit waivers at the end of spring, I'm sure that there would be some catcher needy
Yeah.
team that would at least give him a shot to be a backup that plays 2-3 days a week. And if it's
Yeah.
Mead, I think that you can stomach that loss a little bit more, just given like Sam Antonacci is going to be playing for the White Sox this
Yeah.
year. I don't think that there's really a fourth catcher
No, I agree.
behind Lee that you could. I mean, maybe it's Romo. Like I'm not really sure, but like outside of Lee, I'm not really sure that there's a fourth catcher that you would be willing to make, be willing to like push him to the
Yeah.
big leagues and have him be like a serviceable backup. God willing, Edgar Carroll, Kyle Teal get hurt, he becomes a starter. So like I'm not sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's interesting. Ian's making fun of me for thinking there was an earthquake, but that might be true actually. I don't know, but regardless, um, I think, yeah, with Lee it's tricky because like you'd love to get value for him, but you think about it from the standpoint of other GMs, dude. Like they know that they're
Right,
aware of that. Like teams are aware that the White Sox have 2 good young catchers and don't need Corey Lee. So why would
right.
you trade for Corey Lee when you can force the White Sox hand to either keep him on the roster or to throw him through waivers where any team can claim it, right? So I don't know. I think it's you could make a case either direction, but I do think that like that's probably the reason there's not as much interest in a Corey Lee because everybody knows the White Sox don't need Corey Lee. So why would you trade for him when you can just wait around and get him on
Right.
waivers? In which case he probably makes this roster. So I guess my ultimate prediction would be with you on that regard. Corey Lee, Lenine Sosa, Brooks Baldwin, Everson Pereira. Is that where we're both at? I think.
I think I'm just
And bearing
Everson.
bearing
I don't
trades,
know.
right? I still think that the organization is actively trying and interested in trading both Lenine Sosa and Corey Lee because they
Right.
don't have a place in the future of this team. But assuming they're not traded, it's hard. I don't. They're probably both on the roster, right?
Yeah, it's just gonna be tough for both of them to like carve out a meaningful role. Just like their positions are filled ahead of them by guys who you would expect to be, I don't want to say cornerstone pieces, but like like Chase Meidroth, Munetaka Murakami, and Miguel Vargas, like they can all be lineup pieces on a competitive White Sox team. And Lenyn Sosa, maybe like Meidroth has more control than him, Vargas has more control than him. So like I understand
Right.
giving the younger guys shots over Sosa, but like at the same time, Lenyn Sosa hit 20 homers last year and was one of the better hitting second basemen in the AL last year.
Yeah.
So
Well,
it's
second
tough
baseman.
because second baseman. It's a very
DH.
ambiguous term, but yeah, I could easily see a team trading for Lenyn Sosa, but at the same time, the White Sox aren't really in a position where they could maximize Lenyn Sosa's value. Just like I said, given the fact that he's not going to be playing every day, and there's guys above him on the depth chart that the White Sox want
Right.
to give more runway to.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. I think we're in agreement. I think let's flip over to the pitching side. This is I actually the pitching side is where I love camp battles because
Yeah,
any pitcher can like show up 3 miles an hour higher than last year after an amazing offseason and just like shove and make the last spot in the bullpen. Like
right.
it is possible. It happens every year across teams. Like it's really interesting. I just it's a fascinating thing to look at. So we'll start with the rotation because we and most people think there's five players that are in this rotation. I think the five is pretty clear. With that said, I'm not certain. And I'll preface that by saying I think there's a clear five. I'm not certain about the fifth. Shane Smith will be starting opening day. I don't care when Will Venable announces it. He's going to be starting opening day.
Right.
Davis Martin, I expect to be starting day 2. Anthony Kay, I expect to be starting day 3. Eric Fetty, I expect to be regardless of the order, I think Eric Fetty will be in the rotation. He might be the 5, depending on who makes it. I think those 4 at this point with the Fetty signing are pretty locked in. Sean Burke is the expected 5, but feel free to disagree with me here. I don't think it's impossible for somebody to come in and knock Sean Burke out of the rotation going into the year just because this is a guy who struggles with command. He has 2 options. We know this stuff is good, but if his command is where it was mid-season last year, rather than beginning of the year, end of the year, there's a chance somebody comes into camp and shoves enough to take the 5 spot from him and force him to go to Charlotte for a couple weeks and bounce back and be the first guy up out of Charlotte. I still think Burke's the 5 starter, but do you see any chance there is a true battle for that 5 starter spot?
I really don't think so. I think Sean Burke impressed me enough in the second half last year where I really don't think that he should be even in conversations to be knocked out of the rotation. Like his second half last year was actually pretty good. Like, outside of
After he got sent down for a bit, right? I mean,
yes,
he had
yeah.
he had a little blemish in Charlotte, but I agree with you. September was really encouraging, actually.
Yeah, like his September, it was I'm pulling up his stats right here, but it was 16.2 innings of a 3.78 ERA, 23 strikeouts to only 9 walks. That's encouraging. That was his highest gap between strikeouts and walks
Yeah.
in the entire season. Like, I mean, you look at May and July, it was 25 strikeouts to 20 walks in May, 25 strikeouts to 11 walks in July, and then, gets sent down and works on mechanics or whatever. I think it was mechanical issues, right?
It looked like he was changing some things with his grips and his release point as well. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's an interesting. He moved some things around for sure. And I think that I think he's in a good spot, and I think Sean Burke is deserving of a year to start the year in the rotation and see what happens because I do really believe in this stuff. I also think there's a world where somebody takes this spot and Burke transitions, goes to Charlotte, and could. I don't think it's this year, but I think there's a world where Burke at some point, if he struggles as a starter this year, does shift into a relief role at some point later in the year. I don't know. It's interesting to think about. I think that there's a chance. I do think he has the clear edge on the 5 spot, but I wouldn't say it's his. I think he has to come out and prove it to an extent this spring.
Who else would you see in contention? Would it be like a Jonathan Cannon, Sean Newcomb, maybe? Like, I think those two are really the only 2 guys that I could see taking his spot, but at the same time, like Burke's last start of the year, his stuff was it ticked up by like 3 miles an hour. Like his fastball, I think he hit like it was above 99.5 or something ridiculous like that. And I don't know if he was just emptying the tank. He was like, all right, this is my last start of the year. I'm gonna throw it all out there and just empty. Like I said, empty the tank. But like his last start was very very positive in terms of like velocity and just pitch shape and everything. And
Yeah.
maybe he found something. Like maybe he's building off of that start, and that's the Sean Burke that we get in spring training and all throughout 2026. But what if you get the May version of Sean Burke where it's 25 strikeouts and 20 walks across what was it, 33 innings? So like that can happen again. But
Right.
at the same time, Jonathan Cannon wasn't. I wouldn't say much better. I don't know if they might be comparable, but I wouldn't say
No,
either has the
I mean Cannon was rough most of last year. I mean that's a guy who I
yeah
think is going to be depth, and he's still a piece and is in the picture and is going to be competing in big league camp. But like it was a lot rougher. I mean, yeah, you mentioned that last start, right? I think we just got in the chat here from Adrian, right? Like I just pulled up the numbers and the Savant numbers from that last game. You're looking at 18 plate appearances with 2 hits allowed, 1 walk, 10 strikeouts. You had a strikeout rate over 50% in that game. You had the velo up in the 97. He topped at 9. He topped at 98 that game, which is no, no,
yeah
actually no. He topped at 98.8 that game, which is the highest we saw Burke pretty much all year. I think. I don't think he was sitting. I
yeah
don't think he was hitting
100%.
97, 98s consistently like he was at the very end of the season there. I mean, it's encouraging, right? I think it's very encouraging to look at that and see what he was doing. I mean, even the strikeouts, right? Like the strikeouts were coming half on the fastball, half on the curveball. I mean, that curveball was his curveball when it's at its best is a very plus pitch. It's a 60 grade curveball when he's able to locate it consistently enough. So I'm curious to see how he comes out looking in the spring. I mean, we'll see how it looks in some of these games, and we'll get the Statcast data pretty early, right? We'll see how the numbers look, but I do think it's Burke's spot to lose. With that said, like, there's some prospects that are knocking on the door. I'm not talking Jonathan Cannon, but I'm talking some guys, your Tanner McDougal's, your David Sandlin, who just came over from Boston, your Duncan Davitt. Like, there's some guys that are here that could make a run for this spot. And I also think it gets interesting where you could, if Burke really struggles, you could see a situation where there's an opener for Burke. I mean, not even struggles, actually, pardon me. Burke did better last year at times with an opener, and the organization has been very open about the fact that they don't mind having an opener for their 4 or 5 spot in their rotation. In which case, I wouldn't be shocked to see an opener for Burke, and then Burke as your 4 innings, 5 innings of bulk guy, but with an opener preceding him to start the season at least, and seeing how that progresses, because that did wonders for him at times last year.
Not even at times. He is his stats as a
He's just
reliever,
better.
30.1 innings pitch of a 2.97 ERA. That's pretty good. And like
It's
I'm not
pretty
saying
good.
that this is going to happen, but we've floated out the idea of Rule 5 pick Jedickson Paez being sort of like that opener for maybe a young arm, maybe whoever. I think if Jedickson Paez can give you 2 innings
Yeah.
and then you roll into 5, 6 innings of Sean Burke every fifth day, I would love that because again, Sean Burke, maybe it's a small sample size. Maybe it's just a random occurrence where, all right, yeah, he threw 104 innings as a starter and then 30 innings as a reliever and had significantly better stats as a reliever. But if you can get even just like a 3.5 ERA out of Sean Burke as sort of that long man following an opener, I would love that. Like just because I don't know what it was, but the first inning of basically every Sean Burke start,
Yep.
he would walk like 3 guys, and the White Sox
Yep.
would be down 2-0 before they even batted. Like it would be something like that. But then he would settle down and find his rhythm as the game went on. But then I don't know. I feel like if it was Paez followed by Burke for 7 innings or 2 innings of Paez, 5 innings of Burke, and then you turn it over
Sure.
to the bullpen, I'm perfectly fine with that.
I'm not opposed to that at all. I think it could make some sense. So I mean, again, I was just playing devil's advocate for the sake of the conversation. I don't
Yeah,
think Burke's spot is 100% locked up. For that matter, I'm not sure Eric Fetty's spot is 100% locked up,
right.
considering it's 1.5 million. Like, there's a world you throw Fetty as your long reliever in the bullpen if he really struggles out of camp. That's not impossible. I still think they're both. I still think ultimately the rotation is going to be Shane Smith, Davis Martin, Anthony Kay, Eric Fetty, Sean Burke. Could Burke get pushed? There's a world. There's a world. I hope not. I like Sean Burke. He's a class A dude, and the stuff is there. And I think that he deserves a month or two to really show what it looks like in the starting role. But it's also not impossible that somebody were to push him out. So I think we're in agreement, though, that is the 5 here that we're expecting to be in the rotation come opening day.
Yeah, and like you said, I wouldn't be shocked, if one of the younger guys like Tanner McDougal, Duncan David, guys who are already on the 40-man show out and have just a monster spring, and it forces the White Sox to have some discussions because Tanner McDougal, if the command gains that he made last year are real, like there's a very strong possibility that he's the most talented arm in the White Sox system, like bar none. Like the stuff is unreal, and if the command can stick. I am a gigantic Tanner McDougal fan, and I think that the White Sox are big fans of him too. Just given the fact that how much they were marketing him at Sox Fest, I'm in love with the idea of Tanner McDougal getting up once he gets the extra year of control, similar to what the White Sox did with Chase Meidroth last year. I love the fact that the White Sox seem to be pushing him towards the big leagues this year. And I am a big fan of Tanner McDougal just going out and shoving for the better portion of 2026.
Yeah, I'm curious what that will look like. I mean, I think he'll be up. I just think it's a matter of then if we're talking about this five being the initial five, it's like who does he push out, right? Does Fetty struggle and they DFA and they move on from Fetty and it takes McDougal's spot. If Burke struggles out of the gate, is that does Burke get sent down for the sake of a McDougal, right? Is it it could go multiple directions. But I agree with you that McDougal will be up, and all indications are Noah Schultz has been shoving in camp too. In which case, he'll push the agenda too if he's fully healthy. Like you don't need to waste Schultz bullets in the minors if he's fully healthy and
Right.
proving that, right? So there'll be some competition. This rotation will not remain this rotation all season, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But I do think that it will be this five to start the year, most likely,
Right.
bearing anything crazy happening in camp right now.
Yeah, and I think the
Flipping over,
bullpen is
yeah, go ahead.
yeah
I was
the,
gonna
the
say,
bullpen is where it gets a little bit more fun just because bullpen arms can be so volatile. Like a bullpen arm can have a good spring for 2 weeks and make the team,
right?
but then turn into a pumpkin once actual baseball is played. But guys, I think that there's about two, maybe three spots that you could maybe say are
I,
up for grabs.
I,
The
I
the
really
ones,
think it's only two. I don't think it's. I mean, I'm not sure. I don't see any world where the six. We mentioned this earlier, but like, I don't see any world where there's six that don't make it. I would be very shocked.
the only
Maybe
thing that I
we'll.
would say is like maybe Paez doesn't have the best spring and they
Oh,
send
I
him back.
wasn't even including Paez. I
Oh,
wasn't
really?
including
Okay,
Paez.
then. Okay, then never
I was
mind.
going. I'll rip this if you're cool with it. I
Yeah,
was
yeah. Go ahead.
going. Sir Anthony Dominguez, Grant Taylor, Jordan Leisure, Sean
Oh, yeah. I
Newcomb,
can't count. Never mind.
Mike Vassell,
Yeah,
and Jordan Hicks, recently
yeah.
acquired. I think those six are all but locked in. Yes, Jordan Leisure and Grant Taylor and Mike Vassell have options technically. I don't see any role. Those are your three best guys from last year.
Right.
Leisure, everybody who complains about Leisure, I'm sick of hearing it. The guy's a dog. He second half of the year was disgusting. He'll be on the roster. We know Grant Taylor will be on the roster, and Mike Vassell was at a 2.2 ERA or whatever the heck he had magically last year, even though it doesn't really make sense, but he did. Those six guys, pretty locked in. From there, you need another lefty. There's only one lefty in that bullpen, and in a rotation with only one lefty as well. So, given that Sean Newcomb right now is the only guy in that bullpen who's a left-hander, you're gonna have one more left-hander, and then you got one more spot. So, I mean, at this point, like, there's no world really where both Rule Five guys make it. I think you get one at most, and then the lefty is interesting because you've got 3 to 4 guys who all could take that spot, but I do think you get at least one of the two final spots goes to a lefty.
I think that I would give the spot to Chris Murphy. They traded for him from the Red Sox, gave up Ronnie Hernandez for him. I want to say that was like it was around the Rule 5 draft.
Yeah,
But
it's
I
roster
think that
clearing spot. Yeah,
yeah, but I think that Chris Murphy, like when you look at sort of what he did in like I wouldn't say limited time, but like I mean, he's a relief pitcher. He's not going to get a crazy amount of innings, but he was good in 2025. He was shoveled back and forth between AAA and Major League Baseball, but like he was pretty solid. I mean, it was 50 innings of around a 3 ERA baseball combined, and maybe it's not the most sustainable just given like underlying stats or whatever. But I think Chris Murphy is a guy who can go out and give you multiple innings too. I don't think he's necessarily a guy where he comes in for three batters and then goes take a seat. Like I think he can go out and
he's
throw
been a
two
starter
innings.
for most of his minor league career,
Exactly.
coming up
Yeah.
the ranks.
I think
Right?
that I think that Newcomb is a more likely possibility to be like that high leverage lefty. And everybody knows, or everybody who's watched the show knows that I'm not a big Brandon Eisert fan. But I think that Chris Murphy can essentially do Brandon Eisert's job, but better in a way.
Yeah. So okay. So this is just some options, right? I'm seeing a lot of different names in the chat because there is a lot of options here. I mean, the
Mhm.
bullpen's where it gets interesting, and I mentioned this earlier. Like guys can just pop up, and like that's the bullpen. That's where things happen. Where like there could be a guy that we don't even mention right now that like pops up as a non-roster guy and makes this team. Like Austin Voth was just signed 2 days ago
Yeah,
out of the KBO and was kind of
he was
nasty last year in
nuts.
Korea.
Yeah,
Actually, like he was really gross. So that's an interesting one as well. Like I think there's a lot of things to consider, and Adrian brings this up in the chat. There's a lot of names. So
right.
if we're looking at two spots, one being a lefty, you mentioned Brandon Eisert off the top has two options still, so still a guy you can option. You've got Chris Murphy, who has three options, I think, or one. No, only one option. Pardon me,
One.
I was looking at the wrong guy. Has one option, so another guy you could option if you want to, from the left-handed side at least. You've got Tyler Gilbert, who Adrian just mentioned in the chat does not have an option, and I mentioned this to you earlier. Like, I'm not a huge Tyler Gilbert guy. He wasn't great last year. He was okay, but that's a guy without an option. So if you don't want to lose Tyler Gilbert, you traded for him, last year, right? Like, are you willing to just bite the bullet and put Tyler Gilbert through waivers? Maybe he might be okay doing that. And then you've got a couple other. You got a non-roster guy in Ryan Baroki, who's another interesting one. Kind of a funky, interesting profile actually, and someone
Yeah.
who's on a minor league deal, so you don't have to worry about the option side of things. So he could just go straight to to trips and be that guy and be fine. But this is a guy who was in the bigs last year and was okay in the bigs at times. It wasn't bad, a 4.3, 4.6 ERA, right? So those are four guys, I think, on the lefty side, right? I think that's about it. I'm not seeing any other lefties. I mean, you got the veteran, the young guys in Shane Murphy, Tyler Schweitzer. I don't think those guys are
Right.
making it, right? So you've got four guys for one spot, probably, in terms of, unless they wanted to have two more lefties as those final two spots. Maybe it's two spots, but realistically, those four lefties are competing for likely one spot, maybe two, if two of those guys really prove that they need to be around. The only one without any options is Tyler Gilbert. I kind of think it's Gilbert to open the year, to be honest, and I don't love it. I really don't love it, but I part of me thinks to protect the innings and just having more guys in the system, you could go Gilbert out of the gate, and then the second he struggles and or really gets you through some innings for a month or two, then you DFA and you turn the script over to a Murphy or to an Icer potentially.
I think that that's the more likely option, but I would go with Murphy. I'm not the biggest Tyler Gilbert fan. He's a tall lefty with he's got some fun stuff. It moves a lot, but soft tossing lefty who can't really get a punch out or not even just get a punch out. Just like he's not. I wouldn't say a lefty specialist. He's not a righty specialist either. So like
Right.
I struggle to see what value he can bring to the table that Chris Murphy can't. And Tyler Gilbert has he came up as a starter and he threw a no-hitter in his first start, so like he has experience throwing multiple innings, so maybe they think that he can be that sort of role, bulk lefty, and then Newcomb becomes your high leverage guy. But you look up and down sort of like the non-roster invites, and like there's some fun names here where like I could very easily see them getting that last spot, regardless of whatever they do with the lefty. Like if Jackson Paez struggles out of the gate, I am kind of all for Zach Franklin getting that final spot.
Mm.
I
I have a hard
I
time saying that one
I
right
kind of
now,
love
at
it.
least.
I kind of love it.
Yeah. So going back to the lefties, and then I'll get to that point, right? Like the interesting thing with Isert is like Isert's underlying is really strong, and the team likes that.
Yeah.
I get it was a frustrating year last year, and man, whenever he came in with runners on base, it got ugly. Maybe that's just the guy you just let be your bulker lefty, where it's just you will bring him in to clean innings in this fifth or sixth inning when you need to, and you just have him go from there. I don't know what the situation is. I don't know how you kind of angle that maybe, but I do think Iser has a good chance if it's not going to be Gilbert, just because I don't disagree with you. I think Murphy's interesting, and I think we'll get to see Murphy sometime this year.
Right.
I think it'll likely be either you bite the bullet and you say goodbye to Tyler Gilbert for the sake of Isert because you're comfortable with him, you feel more consistent with him, or you just protect the coverage of a Gilbert so you don't lose him for nothing potentially, and then you have Isert, Baroki, and Murphy all waiting in the wings to fill innings the second you need them to. That last spot, then either way, once you pick one lefty at least, that final spot is. I mean, there's 15 guys that can
Yeah.
compete for that spot. I mean, really, you got both Rule 5 guys. The organization, I'll tell you guys this, like, they would love to keep Jetix and Paez this entire year. they would love to keep him. Like, I mean, this is so messed up to say, and like this is why the Rule 5 draft is very confusing and a complicated nature. But like, the ideal situation is Jedickson Paez gets hurt. Like, I mean, that's like
Yeah.
it sucks, but like that's what like I mean, ultimately, like you got a 21-year-old kid who's very talented and is probably a borderline top 10 prospect in this system, but you have to keep him on the major league roster all year. Like, it's really hard to do that. If he shows out in camp, he will get that last bullpen spot
Yeah.
because they view him as a legitimate upside starter for the future potentially. But you got to get him through this entire year in a bullpen mop up opener role, which he could do okay in. He also could get the doors blown off him because he's a 21-year-old who hasn't pitched above high A. So there is a real world where both Rule 5 picks in Alberto and Paez don't make the roster. In that circumstance, it could be any number of a second lefty of the guys we just mentioned, could also be anybody in the list of, we haven't mentioned what Kelman Gonzalez has an option, but that's a guy who actually took a big step forward later in the year, and I think is a guy that's still in the fold for a future spot in this bullpen. Both the Rule 5 guys, Zach Franklin, Ben Peoples, Tyler Davis, Jairo Iriarte still in the picture. You've got more non-roster guys like Lucas Sims, Tyson Miller, Addison Coffey's been in the org for the last couple of years and has been sort of knocking on the door, right? There's a lot of guys that will be competing for that situation. Interested to see how it plays out. The Rule 5 guys are the key of my attention, though, because I would love to see one of the two of them make the roster, but it's going to be an uphill battle for either of those guys to crack the roster when they've never pitched above high A and they've got all these veterans competing for this spot with them. 10 guys we just listed off there that could be trying to get that last bullpen spot.
Yeah, and Adrian again is taking all my thunder in the chat. The second the Jordan Hicks trade got fully announced, and it said that the Red Sox were given 2 player to be named laters, and the White Sox were given 1 player to be named later.
Or the opposite, I think, right? No,
I thought it was 2. Red Sox were given 2, White Sox were given 1. But I
keep
could
going.
Be wrong
keep explaining your thought. Yeah.
Anyways, I think that deal was sort of a handshake agreement for the White Sox to keep Jedickson Paez, because I think that they're trying to figure out ways to get him on the roster and get all of his option years, everything. And the Red Sox aren't really in a position where they can wait around. I don't want to say wait around, but like their starting rotation is nuts. It's got Garrett Crochet, Peyton Tolle, Connolly Early, Sonny Gray, Brian Bayo. Like it's a stacked rotation, and it's tough to see where Jedickson Paez could slot in. Maybe he's a bullpen arm. But, at the same time, the White Sox could use him. Maybe there's a sort of handshake deal figured out where, White Sox send him back to the Red Sox, only for the White Sox to then turn around and complete the deal with a player to be named later that would be better than, what they would give up if they kept Paez. So, like, it's a very tinfoil hat theory.
No, I kind of like it. I'm not going to lie. I kind of like it.
Yeah.
I don't think... Maybe that's part of what got the deal over the line was like, hey, like if we take Jordan Hicks back because Boston was desperately trying to get rid of Jordan Hicks, then it is like if we don't think Paez can make our roster, we're gonna not keep him on the roster, but then you're sending him right back to us. It is 2 player to be named layers coming to the White Sox, by the way. So I was right on that one. Like he seems like too good of a player to be a player to be named later, but maybe because he's the Rule 5 pick, because he's already with the White Sox now, like that does fit the bill. And maybe then the White Sox, in return, the player to be named later going back to Boston becomes a guy that's currently on the 40 man that the White Sox would want to clear out in that situation.
Right. So like it's a very very tinfoil hat.
It's a little tinfoil hatty, but I don't hate it. I mean, I think it's possible. I think there's a world where that could make sense. Maybe in a different angle. Is there a world where the player to be named later, one of the going back to Boston, could be Alberto? Would any part of Boston? I don't think they'd have room on their roster for him. But like, I don't know. Maybe that's another way to get value or to swap those guys. Right? I think it's going to be really interesting to see how that. I don't know. It also could be nothing. Like those player to be named later could end up being complete flyers. Right?
It's very rare for 3 player to be named later
in the same deal. Yeah, it's
deal,
odd. And it's odd for sure.
so that's what sort of sparked everything. I was like, why are there so many player to be named later? So again, I doubt that even happens. Hopefully, Pius just shoves and he's worthy of a roster spot, and comes out and I want to say has the Shane Smith season, but like hopefully he can stick around and the White Sox can gain his option years, because I believe it's like the end of June is where you have full control over them, and then they're able to be optioned. I could be wrong on that. It might be like you have to keep them for the entire year and then you get their option years, but I'm not entirely sure on how that works. The Rule 5 draft is so confusing. So,
Yeah, it's interesting for sure. So I'm curious to see how that plays out. I do think that those last two bullpen spots are really truly up for grabs at this point.
yeah,
If you had to take a wild shot at those final two spots right now, I know Chris Murphy's your guy on the lefty side. Who are the final two you're taking there?
I I, I think it's Murphy and Paez. I think that it's those two, and you could make a case for Gilbert just because he's out of options, and you want to see what he can do, and maybe you get like a small return for him in like early April when a team needs a lefty bullpen arm. So I'm not saying that it's out of the realm of possibility where Gilbert makes a team, but like I I don't want it. I don't necessarily say I don't want to see it, but I would rather give the shot to Chris Murphy just because he's thrown well in limited innings in the major leagues and was good in AAA last year. So I would give the shot to him. And then I really do think Paez sticks around. I think that the White Sox are going to try and find a way to work their magic like they did with Smith and Vassell last year. And I think that, Paez is interesting enough to say like, all right, yeah, you're very raw. You're not going to be pitching in high leverage in games where it's 1-0 and we need 3 outs right here. That's not going to be your role. Your role is going to be,
Yeah.
opening for Sean Burke. You're going to be throwing 3 innings in the middle of a 10-0 blowout. Like that's, I think, is going to be the role for Paez. But if the White Sox can keep him around,
Right.
I think he's got the stuff to be a mid rotation arm for the White Sox in the future.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there. I think I'm with you there. I think I go Gilbert and Paez, just because
Yeah,
I don't think they're gonna want to. I mean, maybe it's I almost want to go Isert actually, just because I think Isert is a little bit more interesting of a pitcher than Gilbert. And you just cut your losses with Gilbert. I'm gonna go Isert and Paez. As much as I think Gilbert having no options might have an edge just because of their roster construction, because you want to protect as many guys as possible and not lose pitchers for no reason.
right.
I don't really think Gilbert would get claimed, frankly. And if he did, like,
Doubt it.
whatever. Um,
Yeah.
so so I'm gonna go Isert and Paez because I know you're gonna want a lefty. I think Isert is equipped to do a little bit of mop up role as a lefty, the earlier innings lefty out of the bullpen, with Newcomb being your leverage lefty, and then Paez is an interesting one. I kind of love your little player to be named later thing, because in that case, if you can get Paez fully as
Yeah.
the player to be named later in that thing, and Adrian mentioned Sosa, like if Boston won Sosa and the White Sox could get Paez and another kind of interesting prospect flyer as the two player to be names later, I'm fine with it,
Yeah.
because then you send Paez to Birmingham and you let Paez develop for a year or two and not have to worry
Right.
about it. In which case, that last spot, that gets fun. I don't know where I'd go with that last spot. If Paez somehow comes to the White Sox in that, maybe it is two lefties, and Wolf just said it right now. Maybe it is both, Isert and Gilbert, or Murphy and Gilbert, or something like that. I also could see a couple other guys. I don't think Gonzalez makes it. Maybe that lets you keep Alberto on the roster. Maybe you
Yeah.
keep Paez and then it ends up being Alberto and one of the lefties. I don't know.
I think that if that happens like before the opening day rolls around and you have to make your final cuts, I think that they would go with a guy who is already on the 40 man, and I think it would be Alberto. And just cuz like he I think is more likely to, I don't want to say be a leverage bullpen arm than Paez, but like at least right away. I don't think that Alberto is going to be like Emmanuel Clase Jr. That was one of my hot takes for 2026 was that he would be the closer by the end of the year, but that has gone out the window now that Sir Anthony Dominguez is signed. But I think that there's a clearer path to being like an impact player in 2026 for Alberto than Paez, just given Paez has, I don't want to say he does have worse stuff. Just it's a starters pitch mix. He doesn't have like the sort of high octane stuff that Alberto has, But
Yeah.
again, if you want to give a shot to Raquelme Gonzalez, maybe like I said, Zach Franklin, Ben Peoples, Tyson Miller, Lucas Sims, even Addison Coffey, like there's so many different ways that you can work out that last spot if Paez doesn't make it, and you get him back. However, but I think that the last bullpen spot is going to be the one where it's coming down to the wire for everybody, and everybody's battling it out in the final like week of camp.
Yeah, no, I think it's going to be interesting. I think that last spot, those last two spots, frankly, are going to be really fascinating to watch. And that's where the bullpen competitions are fun. And it's interesting because I think we kind of expected to have four spots be like that,
Right.
a couple months ago. And then you obviously end up filling up the bullpen. And I don't think it's impossible that another guy gets signed, in the spring. Maybe they say, you know what, we don't love any of our lefties. Let's just go get one of the lefties on the market. Andrew Chafin, Danny Colombe, who we've talked about all offseason. Like, there's still a world that happens as well. So it's going to be interesting. And I think it's a fun position to be in. And I know we've talked about this before, but like, I think this bullpen is like borderline good this year. I
Yeah.
think that might be a little bullish of me, but like, you could talk me into this bullpen for the first half of the season because I expect a couple of these guys to get moved to the
Right.
deadline
Yeah.
as they should be. But from April to July, you could talk me into this bullpen being a top 10 unit in baseball if things really go the right direction. Like, I wouldn't shock me.
Yeah, no, I think that the back three of Leisure, Taylor,
Back
Dominguez.
five, dude. The back five.
Yeah,
Factor Newcomb. Throw
Hicks,
Newcomb and Vassell into that.
Newcomb,
Yeah, I
like
mean,
that's pretty fun. And like the White Sox haven't had.
oh, Chafin did sign. Good call.
Yeah, I was gonna say
But
I
yeah,
thought he did, but yeah,
yeah,
no, like the White Sox bullpen in high leverage. There hasn't been a lot of good White Sox bullpens in high leverage the last like 5 years, dating back to 2021, where Rick Hahn built a $70 million bullpen. But like the last couple of years, the White Sox bullpen has not been great with a lead. And I think that with some positive regression and just better arms in the bullpen, I think that this bullpen actually could be pretty fun to watch on, I don't want to say a nightly basis, but like on a pretty consistent basis. You got Taylor and Leisure and Dominguez just coming out in the final 3 innings throwing fuzz like that's fun.
yeah. No, I'm with you. I'm excited. I'm looking forward to it. So that's a gauge of the positional battles. I think we kind of it really in our eyes there really only is five spots up for grabs, three on the bench and two in the bullpen most likely. With that said, it's spring training battles. You never know what happens. I'm excited to watch the positional battles. We've been talking for plenty of time tonight, but I'm looking forward to seeing how this all plays out. We'll get to see a lot of these arms, in the coming days. We're 3 days away. This weekend, we're going to see a lot of the young guys throw. I think it sounds like a lot of the non-roster guys and prospects are going to throw in this first week of spring training, and that makes it really exciting to watch. And I think we're going to follow these battles closely. We'll keep you guys updated on the Future Sox pod at Future Sox on all social medias. Reminder for people listening, we're on Instagram now. Our guy Adrian's been crushing it. We're going to get some more content up on Instagram, YouTube as well. We're going to have even more. I'm sure our video king, Ian Eskridge, is going to have so much content going on both the YouTube and the Twitter side. You can find Dylan at Not Cease. You can find me at Elijah EV8. And we'll talk to you guys next week when there is baseball games that have been played. All right. Thanks, everyone.